Lars Voedisch is Managing Director and Principal Consultant at Precious Communications, a fast-growth boutique strategic communications and public relations consultancy that services B2C and B2B companies across Asia-Pacific and beyond. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome him to the Change Matters Virtual Summit. Nice to have you with us, Lars.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this and can't wait for the book to be there and reading it and holding it in my own hands.
Thank you again for joining. Over the past months, I had the chance to explore the wisdom of change leaders from the UN and corporate world, but more and more questions are popping up from the startup realities, and people are asking me, how should we lead a change? How should we cope with resistance? You have managed to grow Precious Communication from a startup to a well-established regional agency in your field. And I was wondering if you could give us some insight into what made the difference for you.
Well, besides growing Precious, we also worked with over 600 startups in Southeast Asia and beyond. And one of the key things that I realized is, especially at the beginning of a startup, you have a very different vibe, right? You don't have anything. So everything you do nearly is trial and error. So you have a much higher risk tolerance and you have a much bigger playing field at the beginning a lot of times. And change is that kind of more constant for the first years in any new business or venture. So the attitude in people is different because they know you have to find your product market fit. You know that you have to can be very bold what you want to do, but at the end of the day, the market decides what they want to buy from you. So you constantly adjust, trial, error, pivot a lot of times. And that's generally a more growth mindset that I feel you have at earlier stage companies, startups, and that we had in Precious. Compared to larger corporates, they're at a very different stage, right? So you have to look into the concept of where in that growth journey is an organization and the people that are in it. At the early stage of any organization, you're very short-term project focused. In startups, it's a lot about funding rounds, right? From angel to C to A to B. And that's usually also defines your thinking. It's okay, we made it that far. Now the next kind of episode is very clearly defined and we have 18 months to get there. At some point, then you change it from more project to program management. And that's one of the biggest challenges that I see in companies. One of the biggest changes, and that's what we also in Precious saw a few times, because you really move from kind of the exciting inception phase to survival mode, then you grow, right? And the magic happens. And at some point you realize, I can't just grow for growth's sake, I have to get it more structured. So you move from kind of undifferentiated growth into a more strategic expansion mode. And that also means you have to approach it in terms of how you build the organization, what kind of behaviors you motivate, what kind of people and skills you need. So it's really depending on the stage of a startup, a company, a venture that defines on how change is also very different.
It's fascinating to hear what you said, that initially the inception phase is very exciting, but once you need to get into the strategic expansion mode, you have to almost put a different hat on. But one thing you need is growth mindset. What was your experience when from a one-person show, you started building up your team, which is now a regional business? What was the most important thing for you personally to be able to make that leap?
And we're coming to close to 100 people now across 7 markets, right? So you have to go, your decision making needs to be very different, right? What we are focusing on actually right now is something that might sound extremely boring, but it's given in any large organization. We're looking at processes and policies so that decisions are less dependent on individuals, but delivery and decision making is based on a system. So at the end of the day, we have to establish systems so that what we do has redundancies. It's less dependent on just me, the founder, or my second or third man in command, but it's really like that's where large brands and organizations are. They're built around processes, and people have to fulfill roles, it's less dependent on one individual, because then you're extremely vulnerable. And that's what we're doing, right? So I'm actually not in the active business that much anymore. I'm more working also, it's the typical mindset of, are you working on the business or in the business? So very early on, I decided to work on the business, because otherwise you just end up being too ingrained in delivering to clients. And that's good for the clients because you're the expert, but then you can't scale. So if you want to scale, you have to build these systems, structures, processes that you can multiply quality at the end of the day.
So what 3 pieces of advice would you give to people aspiring to grow their startups, to prepare for and face the inevitable resistance from stakeholders?
It's one piece of advice would be to look into really thinking about, why did you start in the first place? Because sometimes that gets lost, right? For me, it was about really wanting to do things different than large organizations in our space, where you have politics, where you have red tape that holds you back from delivering what you're good at, your job, right? And normally we're passionate about what we're doing. So every now and then I have to remind myself that should be the compass. At the same time, reminding myself to share that story, why we are where we are, and why we're doing what we're doing with the people. Because every new generation that comes on board should come on board, not just because to have a job, but to buy into the vision that we have, right? So doing that growth journey, you constantly need to remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing, and if you're on the right track, and also always bring people on board to say, hey, that's why we're doing it. And also have that really open discussion. And I say, like, if you just want a job, we might not be the right place. If you just want to get rich, become an investment banker. If you are not in that mode or in that phase in your life that you want to also grow rapidly in your career, then maybe there's a different job that's better for you. And I think these kind of understanding and being open about that it's not the right fit for everybody is very remarkable, right? I think one piece of advice I really got was, in the beginning, when you start a company, you're just so grateful that somebody wants to work for you. And if it doesn't work out, you always believe it's your own mistake. So you hire fast and you fire slow. The more established and mature and experienced you become, you actually turn it around. Hire very slow, because you need to make sure it's really the right fit. It's not the skills, it's more the attitude than anything else. But if you know it's not the right fit, don't drag it out. Have that conversation rather sooner than later, to reaffirm what can we do, but also to say, okay, it's not the right fit, and again, that's okay. And the third piece of advice is, don't attempt to fix all the problems yourself, right? Startup founders, I think, have the challenge. One is, it's my firm, so I have to fix it, but I'm not the expert in everything. Then if I fix it, I don't get the buy-in from the team. So how can I make the team part of the solution? Too often, I think that's neglected. And then also, like, it's the typical opportunity cost. If you're in a consulting professional services business, your biggest asset is time. Yes, it's cheaper that I did the accounting, but in the same time, I could have hired somebody to do the accounting, and I could have sold my services at a multiple, right? And because I was very cash driven then, or cash flow driven, I hired too many juniors, and then I became the bottleneck for advice, decision making, client counsel, and I actually had to do a few steps backwards. So okay, I actually need people that can multiply what's the value that we deliver, not just arms and legs. And with all these things, you get different kind of resistance around you. But yeah, you have to address it openly and speak about it, and think also, why are people maybe not on board? Maybe it's we didn't share what's in it for them. Maybe they don't understand why we believe that's the need that drives us to do things. Is an internal or external stimulus that makes us to adjust things? Is it the market? Is it regulation? Is it also us changing company direction because we believe we should do something else or expand? So there's so many different key learnings that That's, I think, also one of the biggest blessings to run or build a company, is to constantly be really at this revelation area of like, oh yeah, yes, I messed up, but now I know how to do it better.
Exactly. It's a constant learning journey. As you mentioned, one of the things as change leaders doing our own business is to remember that growth mindset is the key to grow truly and to reach new horizons. Thank you very much, Lars, for your time and for your insights to how to lead changes and why change matters. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Margit.